Very long relationship, bad breakup, super toxic. I was not taking care of myself. I was doing things to my body that just weren't correct. We were alone. We were broken down inside and outside. We looked, felt, and breathed the exact same way.
A lawsuit worth hundreds of thousands of dollars suddenly pulled one of HGTV's biggest stars into a very public battle. The headlines painted a picture of a bitter breakup, explosive accusations, and a relationship that had completely fallen apart. For fans, it was almost impossible to reconcile that controversy with the cheerful designer they watched every week. So what really happened when David Bromstad's private life became front-page news? And how did that legal fight change the course of his life? Join us as we uncover the heartbreaking story behind David Bromstad. The first fall. Everyone knows David Bromstad as the A-list celebrity who picks out dream houses for lucky winners. But long before the spotlight, David was a bullied teenager in small-town Minnesota who had already decided exactly what he wanted his future to look like. He wanted to work for Disney. Fortunately for him, his father backed the idea completely, pushing him toward the one school known for feeding illustrators directly into the company. And David got in. He enrolled at Ringling College of Art and Design in Sarasota, Florida, chasing a career as an animator. But that plan, beautiful as it seemed, was already sitting on top of a much harder foundation. At school, David quickly became a primary target of school bullying. His gentle personality and unconventional artistic style immediately made him stand out, and that difference turned him into a target for relentless prejudice from his peers. School bullies constantly used cruel, gender-slurring words to insult and isolate him. Only much later did David bitterly admit that going to school was torture, and he lived in fear every single day. Art was the one place that felt safe, and Disney represented the version of adulthood where that safety could become an actual career. After graduating with distinction, David's childhood dream became a reality when he was officially hired by Disney. He took on the position of illustrator, specializing in creating decorative props for large-scale theme parks. But the security David thought he had finally found inside the fairy tale kingdom proved temporary when Disney announced a major restructuring. Due to a sudden wave of personnel cuts, David unexpectedly received a termination notice, forcing him to leave his dream position. For David, this wasn't simply the loss of a job. It was the collapse of the future he had spent years imagining for himself. He responded by starting his own company, Bromstad Studio, designing elaborate fantasy-themed bedrooms for children. The work showed real creative range, and it let him keep working in the visual, fantastical style Disney had first trained into him, just without the corporate safety net behind it. And that safety net turned out to matter more than he expected. Bromstad Studio struggled to find its footing, and the highly specialized business model proved difficult to sustain. David later acknowledged that the financial pressure had become severe, leaving him facing an increasingly uncertain future. The first dream he ever built for himself had collapsed, and he was starting over from close to nothing, in a city that had no idea who he was yet. But losing Disney was only the beginning. What looked like the end of David's career would eventually force him toward the opportunity that changed everything. The breakthrough. David eventually moved to Miami, and that move is what put him in reach of the opportunity that changed everything. At the time, HGTV was casting the first season of a new competition series called Design Star, built to find the network's next breakout host, and David decided to audition. He made it to the top 10 before eventually emerging as the winner, beating a field of trained designers in 2006. But the victory meant far more than a competition title. For the designer whose first career dream had already collapsed, HGTV was now giving him something Disney never had. Another chance to turn his creativity into the career he had always wanted. For the next 2 decades, HGTV kept betting on him. He fronted Color Splash for years, took on Beach Flip, mentored later seasons of Design Star, and picked up guest judging spots on Brother vs. Brother. In 2015, he took over as host of My Lottery Dream Home, a show that would eventually stretch past 19 seasons and more than 200 episodes, making him one of the network's longest-running and most recognizable personalities. This was also the stretch of his life where David stopped hiding who he was. He had privately accepted that he was gay at 22, and it took him roughly another decade after that to feel at peace with it. By the time HGTV put him on national television, he had already decided not to soften himself for the cameras. He said he made a conscious choice to play himself rather than play it straight, and HGTV embraced that instead of asking him to tone it down. That decision, though risky, paid off eventually, when David later became the first HGTV personality included on Out Magazine's Out 100 list, recognizing prominent LGBTQ public figures, a distinction that traced directly back to a choice he made the moment he stepped in front of Design Star's cameras. For a man who had once been an outsider in his own hometown, becoming one of the network's most beloved faces looked like proof that the worst chapter of his life was finally behind him. It was not. For the first time, David had the career he had always wanted, the recognition he once thought impossible, and the kind of public success that seemed to prove he had finally escaped his troubled past. But behind the cameras, the foundation was beginning to crack. A $1 million lawsuit storm. While David's career was climbing, his personal life was moving in a completely opposite direction, and it was far from good. He had been in a long-term relationship with Jeffrey Glasgow, a former police officer he met right on Valentine's Day at a singles event in Orlando back in 2004. Their relationship extended beyond romantic affection to encompass business activities. Jeffrey served as chief operating officer for the design firm Bromstad Studio, directly managing finances for the HGTV star. Nonetheless, underlying cracks accumulated over years of high-pressure work and differing life views, pushing the two apart. By early 2015, David and Jeffrey officially announced their separation, shocking the public. However, the breakup was only the beginning. The real crisis erupted later that year. Jeffrey filed a lawsuit against David in Miami-Dade County Court. The allegations went far beyond a routine dispute over shared property. According to reports on the case, Jeffrey accused David of misusing joint funds on substances and other activities during the relationship. For a television personality whose career depended heavily on public trust, the accusations threatened to drag his private life directly into the spotlight and damage the reputation he had spent years building. The court did not agree with any of it. A Miami-Dade judge dismissed the case outright, describing the claims as being among the most scandalous the court had reviewed, and went further by sanctioning Jeffrey Glasgow for pursuing allegations without evidence to support them. Although David ultimately won in court, the legal victory could not erase the experience of seeing his private relationship transformed into a public spectacle. After 11 years together, the person closest to him had become the source of allegations that threatened his reputation, leaving David to rebuild not only his public image, but also his sense of trust in the people around him. David survived the courtroom and walked away legally cleared. But just when he thought the worst was finally behind him, the crisis moved from his public life to his family. Family crisis. While he was struggling to pull himself up after the legal storm, one would expect at least a moment of respite for David. But nothing could be farther from reality. In August 2016, news of his father's critical health condition initiated a series of tearful days. Mr. Richard Bromstad suddenly fell ill and was rushed to emergency care by his family in critical condition. According to the doctors, his heart rate had soared to an alarming 136 beats per minute because of a severe heart valve issue. His condition was worsening, with doctors warning of the serious risk of seizures and stroke. Faced with the possibility of losing his father, David immediately put his filming commitments aside and rushed home. Even though it was a moment when his career demanded that he remain in front of the cameras, his priorities suddenly became much more personal. Staying beside his father and hoping he would survive. David posted an emotional status update on his personal social media pages, requesting prayers from his vast fan base. His plea received tens of thousands of interactions and words of encouragement from audiences everywhere. And as fate would have it, timely intervention from medical staff alongside extraordinary willpower miraculously helped Mr. Richard overcome the critical moment and gradually recover. His father's health crisis occurred right at a time when public opinion raised a wave of rumors regarding David's psychological breakdown. The lingering consequences from the 2015 lawsuit severely impacted his image and mental state. Facing public pressure, David Bromstad publicly admitted that he had experienced a prolonged period of mental crisis. Even so, he asserted his determination to pursue a healthy lifestyle to heal his soul's wounds after a rapid succession of events. His father's recovery gave David something he desperately needed: a reason to keep moving forward. But years later, another disaster would come for the one place he thought could finally give him peace. The storm that nearly ended it all. With his career stable and his personal life somewhat quieter, David set out to build himself a real reward. He planned a fairy tale-inspired renovation on a home in Central Florida, updating the kitchen and adding an extension with a primary bedroom, a walk-in closet, and a home theater. After decades of helping strangers find their dream homes on camera, this was supposed to be the one he built entirely for himself. But while construction was underway, a severe storm turned the dream project into another crisis David could never have anticipated. The flooding soaked the house from the ground up, and the humidity that followed produced mold so extensive that patchwork repairs would never be enough. David ended up demolishing the home down to the studs, essentially starting from nothing on a project that had already consumed his time, his money, and his emotional investment. The damage was more serious than what could be fixed with cosmetic repairs. Walls, flooring, insulation, and other materials had to be stripped away before reconstruction could even begin, turning what was supposed to be a renovation into a massive rebuilding project. What was supposed to take a reasonable stretch of months turned into a 4-year ordeal. This meant David had to live inside an unfinished shell of a house for years, watching the project he had once called a childhood fantasy sit gutted and exposed. The house could be rebuilt, the walls could be stripped, the mold removed, and the damage repaired. What many didn't realize was that the storm had done something far more difficult to repair: a downward spiral. David has since explained, in his own words, what the years after the storm actually looked like from the inside. As the stress compounded, he began sliding into unhealthy behaviors, using substances as a way to escape a situation he no longer felt equipped to handle. He later described substance use as an easy escape when pressure builds beyond what a person feels capable of handling alone. The disturbing part was that David understood how dangerous the pattern was even while he was still trapped inside it. According to David, the collapse was not limited to one part of his life. He said that emotionally, physically, spiritually, and psychologically, everything essentially stopped functioning the way it was supposed to. He said he was literally screaming out for help, even as the cameras kept rolling on a show built entirely around his cheerful public image. The strain eventually pushed him toward professional treatment. David later confirmed he checked into a treatment center to address both the substance use and the mental health crisis underneath it, stepping away from the project long enough to actually deal with what was happening. For a man whose entire brand had been built on effortless positivity, walking into rehab meant admitting the persona and the person were no longer the same thing. Starting in 2017, David began turning to tattoo art as a form of spiritual therapy. He viewed each tattoo on his body as a mark commemorating life and death milestones, as well as important values. At one point, David even joked about becoming addicted to tattoos, as he covered more and more of his body with personal artwork. But beneath the colorful designs was something more meaningful. Each tattoo became a sort of marker of the people, experiences, dreams, and values that helped him make sense of what he had survived. On his skin, he etched symbols of family love to pay tribute to his parents after the turmoil. Alongside those are Disney-inspired images recalling the childhood dreams he once thought were left behind. In particular, David did not hesitate to express pride in the LGBTQ+ community through colorful symbols on his body. The freedom of turning himself into a work of art helped him regain confidence and thoroughly relieve pressure. While David was healing himself, he also actively spread positive values to the community during the 2018 and 2020 periods. He decided to set aside a portion of his personal compensation to sponsor social organizations protecting youth. A perfect example of this was a $10,000 donation to the nonprofit organization Safe Schools South Florida. This is an organization specializing in campaigns to prevent bullying and protect LGBTQ+ students in state schools. The donation had a particularly personal meaning for David because it brought his story full circle. The same kind of bullying that once made school feel like a place he feared could now become the reason he helped protect another generation of children. After walking through fate's most brutal storms, the male host who specializes in finding dream homes for others finally found a peaceful place for himself. David had spent years building an image around helping people find happiness. Now, for the first time, he had to stop helping everyone else and confront what was happening to him. Letting it all out. During the year David paused construction on his house due to the storm, he traveled to Norway, tracing part of his ancestry back to his father's Norwegian roots. He described the trip as genuinely restorative, and it reshaped more than just his headspace. The architecture he encountered there pushed him away from the original fairy tale concept and toward something that reflected this new chapter of his life instead. A shift he has framed as symbolic of the larger transformation he was undergoing personally. By the time David returned to finish the renovation, he was doing so from a fundamentally different place than where he started. He said he is now nearing 3 years of sobriety, describing himself as being in a genuinely good place after everything the previous several years had put him through. The finished home, a roughly 4,000-square-foot Tudor-style house, became more than the literal endpoint of the renovation. After 4 years of destruction, uncertainty, and personal struggle, it stood as physical proof that David had rebuilt more than just a house. David chose to make all of this public in the HGTV special My Lottery Dream Home, David's Happy Ending, which premiered in December of 2025. According to him, the decision to open up on camera was less about promoting a house tour and more about reminding people that he is human. And he explained that going deep into his own story, even when uncomfortable, felt like a privilege rather than a burden. The special also gave David room to reflect on what 19 seasons of hosting a show about other people's windfalls had actually taught him. He pointed out that guiding strangers through the biggest financial news of their lives gave him a strange front-row seat to human behavior under pressure, watching people react to sudden wealth in ways ranging from pure joy to visible anxiety over whether they deserved it. Producing that same show while quietly falling apart himself gave those moments an irony David has acknowledged directly. Week after week, he was coaching lottery winners through the emotional weight of a life-changing event, while carrying his own unprocessed one just out of frame. David made clear he is not leaving My Lottery Dream home, and HGTV has given no indication the show is going anywhere after 19 strong seasons. There's another thing worth noting. David's name was swept up in a wave of viral posts in late 2025, falsely claiming he had been arrested on drug charges. Those claims trace back to old, already dismissed allegations and fabricated social media posts with no backing from any law enforcement agency. At 53, David has survived the collapse of a childhood dream, a public legal battle following the end of an 11-year relationship, a natural disaster that destroyed years of work, and a battle with substance use that emerged as those pressures began piling on top of each other. He built his career on helping other people celebrate the best day of their lives. It took him decades to finally do the same thing for himself, but he did it anyway. After everything he survived, what does the next chapter of David Bromstad's life look like? And after spending so many years helping others find their dream homes, has he finally found his own dream life? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.